The unexpected turn. Dr. Ethan Carlisle was a name that resonated through the halls of St. Mercy's Hospital, revered for his surgical precision and respected for his unyielding commitment to patient care. He was a man with a reputation that left many in awe. Yet, despite his professional accolades, his personal life remained a void, a silent shadow in the backdrop of his success. At 46 years old, Ethan had resigned himself to a solitary life after years of failed attempts to build a family with his late wife, Laura. Laura's departure had been a quiet one. Years of infertility treatments, failed adoptions, and growing emotional distance had strained their bond to the breaking point. One spring evening, she left a note on the dining table, a simple message that spoke volumes. "I need more than this empty house, Ethan. I need a chance to be happy." Ethan had read those words 1,000 times since that day, each time feeling a pang of regret, though he had long since stopped blaming her. He buried himself in his work, finding solace in the operating room, where precision and control ruled. His patience became his purpose, and he accepted his fate as a man destined to heal others, but remain broken himself. It was a late December evening when Ethan's life took an unexpected turn. Snow swirled in the cold wind outside, and the hospital buzzed with its usual chaos. Ethan was completing his rounds, looking forward to a quiet evening with his medical journals and a glass of scotch, when a nurse hurried toward him, her face tight with urgency. "Dr. Carlisle, we've got a severe case in the ER. A car accident. The parents, they didn't make it, but there are 4 kids. It's bad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Ethan felt a familiar shift in his focus, the automatic transition from personal exhaustion to professional alertness. "I'll be right there," he said, his voice steady. The ER was a storm of activity when Ethan arrived. The cries of children blended with the hurried commands of doctors and nurses. Among the chaos, he spotted 4 children huddled together in a corner, their faces pale and tear-streaked. The oldest, a boy of about 12, was holding a toddler in his lap, while 2 other boys clung to his side. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. He had witnessed countless tragedies in his career, but something about these children struck a chord deep within him. Their eyes held a raw vulnerability, a silent plea for help that transcended words. He approached them cautiously, crouching to their level. "Hi there," he said gently, his voice soft. "I'm Dr. Carlisle. Can you tell me your names?" The oldest boy looked at him, his dark eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'm Liam," he said, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "These are my brothers, Noah, Caleb, and Jake." Ethan nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "It's nice to meet you, Liam. I'm so sorry for what you're going through. But I promise you, we're going to take care of you." Liam nodded, his grip tightening on Jake, who had buried his face in Liam's shoulder. A social worker, Claire, joined Ethan, her expression a mixture of professionalism and empathy. "Their parents were killed on impact," Claire said quietly. "We've been trying to locate any relatives, but so far, no one's come forward. It looks like they'll be placed into foster care." Ethan glanced at the boys again, his heart sinking at the thought of them being separated. He had seen it too many times, siblings torn apart by a system that couldn't accommodate them together. It was a fate he couldn't bear to imagine for these boys, whose bond was so evident, even amidst their grief. As the days passed, Ethan found himself drawn to the boys. He visited them daily, bringing small gifts and sitting with them during meals. Liam, ever the protector, rarely let his guard down, but Ethan noticed moments of vulnerability, a fleeting smile, a whispered thank you. On the 3rd day, Claire approached Ethan in the cafeteria. "There's still no family," she said, her tone heavy. "The foster system is our only option now, but it's unlikely they'll stay together. Their ages make it complicated." Ethan's heart clenched. He looked across the room at the boys, huddled together over a shared tray of food. Liam was cutting a sandwich into smaller pieces for Jake, while Noah and Caleb argued over a piece of fruit. It was a scene of quiet resilience, But Ethan could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. What if he began, then hesitated, the enormity of his thoughts taking shape? He looked back at Claire. What if I took them in? Temporarily, until we find a more permanent solution. Claire blinked, clearly surprised. Ethan, that's a big step. Are you sure? Taking in 4 boys is no small commitment. Ethan nodded, his resolve solidifying. I can't let them be separated, Claire. They've lost too much already. I have the space, and I'll make the time. They deserve a chance to heal together. It took weeks of interviews, home evaluations, and paperwork, but on a snowy evening in January, Ethan brought the boys to his house. The drive was filled with nervous silence, the boys stealing glances out the window as if trying to gauge what awaited them. When they arrived, Ethan opened the door to his spacious but sparse home. This is your home now, he said, his voice steady but warm. Take your time exploring. I want you to feel safe here. The boys hesitated before stepping inside. Liam immediately began inspecting the rooms, ensuring everything was safe for his brothers. Noah gravitated toward the living room, where a grand piano stood gleaming in the corner. Caleb's eyes lit up at the sight of bookshelves lining the walls, and Jake clung to Ethan's leg, his wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. That first night, Ethan cooked a simple dinner, spaghetti and garlic bread, and watched as the boys ate cautiously, their politeness tinged with hesitation. He could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. But he also saw a spark of hope, a flicker of trust that he vowed to nurture. As he lay in bed that night, Ethan stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with the weight of his decision. He had stepped into uncharted territory, and he knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that transcended his career. He had taken the first step toward building a family, not the one he had imagined, but one that felt just as meaningful. And though he didn't yet know the trials they would face together, Ethan was certain of one thing. He would do everything in his power to protect and love these boys. They had given him a second chance at a life he thought he had lost, and he wouldn't let them down. The weight of love. Ethan's mornings transformed almost overnight. Gone were the quiet, solitary starts to his days, replaced instead by the hustle and bustle of preparing 4 boys for school. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the sound of Jake's tiny feet pattering down the hallway broke the silence. Ethan, half-dressed in his scrubs, would scoop the youngest into his arms, his laughter cutting through the stillness of the house. The first few weeks were anything but smooth. Ethan had expected challenges, but the sheer weight of the emotional and logistical adjustments blindsided him. Liam, at 12, bore a stoicism that seemed far beyond his years. He took responsibility for his brothers with an intensity that made Ethan's heart ache. Noah, 9, was more expressive, his frustration bubbling over in the form of sharp words and slammed doors. Caleb, the shy and introspective 7-year-old, struggled to find his place in the new environment, often retreating to a quiet corner with a book. And then there was Jake, a bundle of 4-year-old energy and innocence, clinging to Ethan like a lifeline. Ethan quickly realized he couldn't approach parenting the way he approached surgery. There were no precise steps to follow, no guarantees of success. It was messy, chaotic, and unpredictable, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways he hadn't anticipated. The first challenge, one particularly difficult evening, tested the fragile bond forming between Ethan and the boys. It was a Tuesday, a day Ethan had come to dread because of its sheer logistical demands. Early rounds at the hospital, back-to-back surgeries, and then the inevitable chaos of homework, dinner, and bedtime. That evening, he walked into the house to find Noah sitting on the living room floor, angrily tearing apart a paper airplane. Liam stood over him, arms crossed, his voice tight with frustration. "You can't just ignore everyone. Noah, you have to help out too." Liam snapped. Noah shot back, "You're not Dad. Stop bossing me around." The word hung in the air like a bomb, freezing both boys in their tracks. Ethan, still holding his briefcase, stepped into the room, his calm demeanor masking the sting of the exchange. "Everything okay here?" he asked gently. Liam looked down, his jaw tight. "I was just asking Noah to help clean up." "He never listens." "I'm not cleaning up something I didn't make," Noah interjected, his tone defiant. Ethan placed his briefcase on the couch and crouched to their level. "Hey," he said softly, addressing both boys. "This is a team effort. We're all figuring this out together, and it's okay to feel frustrated. But shouting at each other isn't going to help, is it?" Noah's lip trembled, but he stayed silent. Liam nodded reluctantly, his gaze fixed on the floor. Ethan sat down cross-legged, joining them on the carpet. "I know this is a big adjustment for everyone," he continued. "And Liam, I know you've been used to taking care of everyone for a long time. But you're not alone anymore. You don't have to do it all by yourself." Liam blinked rapidly, his jaw tightening as he fought back tears. Noah glanced at his older brother, his defiance giving way to guilt. "I'm sorry," Noah mumbled. "I didn't mean it like that." Ethan reached out, resting a hand on each of their shoulders. "We're family now, okay? That means we help each other, even when it's hard. Deal?" Both boys nodded, their expressions softening. As Ethan stood and helped them tidy the room, he felt a small spark of hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Small victories. The days turned into weeks, and Ethan began to see glimpses of progress in each boy. Liam, though still fiercely protective, started to let his guard down around Ethan, asking for advice on schoolwork or occasionally joining him in the kitchen to help cook dinner. Noah, ever the firecracker, found an outlet for his energy in soccer, and Ethan made it a point to attend every game, cheering loudly from the sidelines. Caleb surprised Ethan one afternoon when he brought home a drawing he had made in art class. It was a simple sketch of their new home, with stick figures representing each member of their makeshift family. "That's you," Caleb said shyly, pointing to the tallest figure in the middle. "You're holding Jake." Ethan's throat tightened as he studied the drawing. It was the first tangible sign that Caleb was beginning to feel at home. Jake, the youngest, was perhaps the easiest to win over. He adored Ethan unconditionally, following him around the house and climbing into his lap during story time. One evening, as Ethan tucked him into bed, Jake looked up with wide, innocent eyes and asked, "Do I have to leave?" Ethan swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "No, buddy," he said softly. "You're staying right here. This is your home now." Jake smiled, his small hand reaching up to hold Ethan's. "Okay, Daddy." The word hit Ethan like a thunderbolt. It was the first time any of the boys had called him that, and it filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. As he kissed Jake goodnight and turned out the light, he realized just how deeply these boys had rooted themselves in his heart. The unseen struggles. For all the small victories, the journey was far from smooth. Each boy carried the weight of their past in different ways. Liam, despite his maturity, struggled with nightmares, often waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Noah's fiery temper masked a deep sense of insecurity, and Caleb sometimes retreated so far into himself that Ethan worried he might never fully emerge. Jake, though young and resilient, occasionally cried for parents he barely remembered. Ethan sought help where he could, enrolling the boys in counseling and leaning on Claire, the social worker, for advice. He read parenting books late into the night, determined to give the boys the stability they needed. But there were moments when he doubted himself, wondering if he was truly enough for them. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a pile of bills and feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. The boys had gone to bed, and the house was finally quiet, but his mind was anything but. Claire had warned him about the challenges of fostering siblings, about the emotional toll it could take, but no warning could have prepared him for the depth of responsibility he felt. These boys weren't just his wards. They were his family. And that thought, as overwhelming as it was, filled him with a fierce determination, a glimpse of hope. A turning point came on a Saturday morning when Ethan decided to take the boys on a hike. It was a crisp autumn day, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. The trail wound through a forest just outside the city, offering a brief escape from their daily routines. As they climbed, Liam stayed close to Jake, holding his hand and guiding him over roots and rocks. Noah raced ahead, his competitive streak on full display as he tried to outpace Ethan. Caleb lagged behind, stopping every few steps to examine a leaf or a bug with quiet fascination. When they reached the summit, the view took Ethan's breath away. The forest stretched out before them, a sea of red and gold under a clear blue sky. The boys stood together, their faces lit with wonder. "This is amazing," Liam said, his voice filled with awe. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "It is," he said. "And so are all of you." In that moment, as they stood together on the edge of the world, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He didn't have all the answers, and the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, he truly believed they could face it together. Storms of the past. The autumn hike had brought a sense of togetherness that Ethan hadn't expected. It felt like the beginning of something deeper. A shift from a group of strangers navigating shared trauma to a family finding their rhythm. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and the storm that loomed on the horizon came from a place Ethan had thought long buried. An unwelcome call. It began one chilly November evening. Ethan was in his study, organizing a case file from a particularly challenging surgery. The house was unusually quiet. The boys had gone to bed after an exhausting day filled with soccer practice, homework, and Caleb's insistence on teaching Jake how to read using oversized flashcards. The phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the silence. Ethan glanced at the caller ID and frowned. The number was unlisted. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Dr. Carlisle," he said, his tone professional. There was a brief pause, then a voice he hadn't heard in years spoke. "Ethan, long time no see." Ethan froze, his hand tightening around the phone. It was Michael, his ex-brother-in-law, and a man he hadn't spoken to since Laura's departure. Michael's voice was rough, tinged with the kind of false friendliness that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Michael," Ethan said slowly, "what do you want?" Michael chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Straight to the point, huh? I like that. Listen, I've been hearing some things about you. Seems like you've built yourself a nice little life. Big house, great job, and now, what's this? 4 kids. Ethan's heart sank. "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is," Michael replied, his tone darkening. "See, I've been having a rough time lately. Lost my job. Ran into some financial troubles. But then I thought, you know who's got a lot of resources? My dear old brother-in-law." Ethan clenched his jaw. "If this is some kind of extortion attempt, you can save your breath." Michael laughed again, this time colder. "Come on, Ethan. I'm just looking for a little help. You wouldn't want me to start digging into your perfect life, would you? Maybe I'll pay a visit to those boys of yours. See how they're holding up." The threat hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. His mind raced, images of the boys' faces flashing before him. He couldn't let Michael anywhere near them. "You stay away from my family," Ethan said, his voice low and firm. Michael's voice turned mockingly sympathetic. "Oh, Ethan, I'm just looking out for them. And for you. Let's meet. Talk this over. Tomorrow. Bluebird Cafe. Noon. Don't be late." The line went dead. Ethan stood in the quiet of his study, his heart pounding. He'd thought his past was behind him, but now it threatened to unravel everything he had built. The burden of secrets. The next morning, Ethan tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. He helped the boys with their breakfast, complimented Caleb on his latest drawing of a dragon, and teased Noah about his messy hair. But Liam, ever perceptive, caught the tension in Ethan's voice and the way his hands lingered too long on his coffee mug. "You okay, Dad?" Liam asked quietly as the younger boys chattered at the table. Ethan forced a smile. "I'm fine, buddy. Just a lot on my mind." Liam frowned but didn't press further. Ethan couldn't bring himself to burden the boys with what was happening. He needed to handle this alone. At noon, Ethan arrived at the Bluebird Cafe. The place was nearly empty, its usual cheerful ambience muted by the gray skies outside. Michael sat in the corner, his disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the polished image Ethan remembered from years ago. He looked up with a smirk as Ethan approached. "Ethan," Michael drawled, spreading his arms wide. "You look good. Life's treating you well, huh?" "Cut to the chase," Ethan said, sitting down across from him. "What do you want?" Michael leaned back, his smirk widening. "I told you last night. I'm in a bit of a bind. I need cash, and you're in a position to help. $1,000 a month should do." Ethan glared at him. "And if I refuse?" Michael's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Then maybe some stories start circulating. About you. About those kids. You think social services won't listen to someone who claims to know things about their past?" Ethan's fists clenched under the table. "You don't know anything about them." Michael shrugged. "Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But are you willing to take that chance?" Ethan stared at him, a storm of anger and fear swirling in his chest. He couldn't let Michael's threats jeopardize the boys' safety or their trust in him. He needed time to think, to figure out how to handle this without giving Michael what he wanted. "Fine," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "I'll get you the money." Michael's grin returned. "Smart man. We'll talk again next month." As Ethan left the cafe, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had to protect his boys, but he couldn't let Michael keep extorting him. He needed a plan. A fractured calm. Over the following days, Ethan tried to focus on his family, but the strain of Michael's threats lingered. Liam, ever watchful, noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor. "Dad," Liam said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, "are you sure everything's okay? You've been different." Ethan hesitated. He wanted to shield Liam from the truth, but he also didn't want to shut him out. "There's someone from my past causing some problems," Ethan admitted. "But it's nothing you need to worry about. I'll handle it." Liam frowned, his eyes filled with concern. "You don't have to do it alone, you know. We're here too." Ethan smiled, touched by Liam's words. "Thank you, Liam. That means a lot. But this is something I need to figure out." As Liam nodded reluctantly, Ethan felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his family. A plan in motion. The next weekend, Ethan sought out Claire, the social worker who had helped him through the adoption process. He explained the situation in broad strokes, careful not to implicate the boys or reveal too much. "I need advice," Ethan said. "How do I protect my family without escalating things?" Claire listened intently, her expression grave. "You need documentation," she said. "If he's threatening you, record it. Build a case, and if you feel the boys are in danger, go to the police immediately." Ethan nodded, her words giving him a glimmer of hope. He would start documenting everything, and he would find a way to stop Michael without letting his shadow disrupt their lives. As the weeks passed, Ethan juggled the demands of fatherhood, his career, and the secret burden of Michael's threats. But he also began to see the strength in his family, the way they rallied around each other, the love that grew stronger with each passing day. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Ethan knew one thing for sure. He would do whatever it took to protect his boys and keep their family whole. Secrets and strength. Ethan's world had become a delicate balancing act. By day, he was the devoted father, managing school drop-offs, soccer practices, and family dinners. By night, he was a man at war with his past, carefully documenting every interaction with Michael, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. It was a life of constant vigilance, but Ethan knew he couldn't let his guard down, not with the stakes so high. The boys, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside their lives, began to settle more fully into their routines. The house, once quiet and orderly, now hummed with energy and noise, each room a reflection of their growing personalities. Despite the shadow hanging over Ethan, there was a part of him that felt deeply fulfilled, even as the challenges of fatherhood pushed him to his limits. The cracks began to show. It was a cold Friday evening when the first crack appeared in Ethan's carefully constructed facade. Dinner had gone as usual. Jake spilling milk all over the table, Noah and Liam bickering over whose turn it was to clear the dishes, and Caleb quietly slipping away to the living room to read. But as the boys settled into their post-dinner activities, Liam lingered in the kitchen. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant. Ethan, in the middle of loading the dishwasher, turned to face him. "What's up, buddy?" Liam hesitated, his brow furrowed. "You've been acting weird, like stressed, more than usual. Is something wrong?" Ethan felt the weight of the question settle over him. He had worked so hard to keep the boys shielded from his troubles, but Liam's perceptiveness was sharper than he'd realized. "I'm fine," Ethan said, forcing a reassuring smile. "Just a lot going on at work." Liam didn't look convinced. "You sure? Because if it's about money or something, I can get a job. I mean, I know I'm only 12, but I can help." Ethan's chest tightened at the offer. Liam had always taken on more responsibility than any child his age should, and the thought of him feeling the need to contribute financially broke Ethan's heart. "You don't need to worry about that," Ethan said firmly, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Your job is to be a kid. Let me handle the rest." Liam nodded reluctantly, but Ethan could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. As he watched his eldest son leave the kitchen, Ethan realized he couldn't keep his troubles hidden forever. Sooner or later, the boys would sense something was wrong. The family meeting. The turning point came a week later. Michael had called again, his demands escalating. Ethan had recorded the call, his hands shaking as he listened to Michael's thinly veiled threats. That evening, as he sat in his study replaying the conversation, he realized he couldn't fight this battle alone. He gathered the boys in the living room after dinner, his heart pounding as he faced their curious and slightly concerned expressions. "I need to talk to you all about something important," Ethan began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "There's someone from my past who's been causing some trouble. He's threatening our family." The boys froze, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. Liam immediately sat up straighter, his protective instincts kicking in. "What kind of threats?" Liam asked, his tone sharp. Ethan took a deep breath. "He's demanding money and making threats about our family's safety if I don't comply." Jake, sitting on Ethan's lap, looked up with wide eyes. "Is he a bad guy, Daddy?" Ethan smiled softly, stroking Jake's hair. "He's someone who's made some bad choices, but I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to make sure he doesn't hurt us." Noah crossed his arms, his fiery nature flaring. "Why don't we just call the police? Isn't that what they're for?" "I've thought about that," Ethan admitted. "But it's complicated. This man knows things about my past, about your past, that he could use to make life difficult for all of us. I'm trying to handle this carefully." The room fell silent as the boys processed the information. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice small but firm. "We're a family now, right? Families stick together." Ethan's throat tightened, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "That's right," he said. "And that's why I need you all to trust me. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Liam nodded, his expression resolute. "We trust you, Dad. Just don't shut us out, okay?" Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I won't. I promise." A growing bond. In the weeks that followed, Ethan noticed a shift in the boys. They became more protective of each other. and of him. Liam, who had always been the responsible one, started helping more around the house, taking on small tasks without being asked. Noah's fiery energy found new focus as he began tutoring Caleb in math, patiently working through the younger boy's struggles. Even Jake, in his innocent way, started picking flowers from the yard and leaving them on Ethan's desk with handwritten notes that read, "For the best daddy ever." Ethan, for his part, worked tirelessly to gather evidence against Michael. He kept detailed records of every interaction, consulting quietly with Claire about the best course of action. He knew he couldn't keep paying Michael indefinitely, but he also couldn't risk escalating the situation without a solid plan. An unexpected ally. One evening, as Ethan was putting Jake to bed, there was a knock at the front door. He frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m., an unusual time for visitors. He kissed Jake's forehead and headed downstairs, his heart racing as he opened the door. To his surprise, it was Emily, a retired nurse who had worked with Ethan years ago and had become something of a surrogate grandmother to the boys. Her kind eyes scanned his face, and she smiled warmly. "Ethan," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've been hearing things." Ethan blinked, confused. Hearing things. Emily set down her bag and crossed her arms. "About Michael. I ran into someone who knows him. Someone who told me he's been bragging about having leverage over you. I figured I'd come by and see if there's anything I can do." Ethan felt a wave of relief. Emily was sharp, resourceful, and fiercely protective. If anyone could help him navigate this, it was her. "You have no idea how much I could use the help," Ethan admitted, leading her into the kitchen. Over cups of tea, he laid out everything. Michael's demands, the recordings, the boys' growing awareness of the situation. Emily listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Ethan finished, she nodded firmly. "We're going to handle this," she said. "Together." A plan takes shape. Over the next several days, Emily helped Ethan refine his plan. She reached out to old connections, gathering information about Michael's recent activities. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to document everything, preparing to file a restraining order and report Michael's behavior to the authorities. At the same time, he worked hard to maintain a sense of normalcy for the boys. He took them to the park, helped with school projects, and even organized a family movie night complete with popcorn and blanket forts. Despite the tension simmering beneath the surface, their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan knew the fight wasn't over, but with Emily's support and the boys' unwavering trust, he began to feel a glimmer of hope. Together, they were stronger than Michael could ever understand. A family under fire. The tension in Ethan's life reached a boiling point as Michael's threats grew more insistent. Over the weeks, Michael had become bolder, calling Ethan at odd hours and even leaving cryptic messages on his voicemail. Each interaction pushed Ethan closer to the edge. But with Emily's steady guidance and the boys' growing trust in him, he remained determined to see the fight through. The boys, though aware something was wrong, carried on with their daily lives, their resilience a source of constant amazement to Ethan. But the strain of keeping them safe while dealing with Michael began to weigh heavily on him, and it was only a matter of time before the cracks in his armor became visible. A close call. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Michael's threats crossed a line. Ethan had taken the boys to the local park, where Jake and Caleb played on the swings while Liam and Noah kicked a soccer ball back and forth. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of falling leaves, and for a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to relax. But the peace shattered when Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. The number was unlisted, but he knew who it was before he even answered. "Ethan," Michael's voice drawled, smooth and mocking. "Out enjoying a little family time." "I see." Ethan froze, his eyes scanning the park. His heart pounded as he spotted a man in a dark hoodie leaning against a tree in the distance. Though he couldn't see the man's face, the posture and the timing of the call left no doubt in his mind. "What do you want, Michael?" Ethan said, keeping his voice low. "I just wanted to remind you how easy it would be for me to drop by for a chat," Michael said, his tone dark. "You wouldn't want anything to happen to those kids, would you?" Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Stay away from them, Michael. I'm warning you." Michael chuckled. "Relax, Ethan. I'm just having a little fun. But you might want to pick up the pace on those payments. I'm feeling impatient." The call ended, and Ethan felt a wave of anger and fear wash over him. He turned to find Liam watching him from a distance, his expression troubled. "Dad?" Liam called, jogging over. "What's wrong?" Ethan forced a smile, though he knew it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing, buddy. Just work stuff." Liam didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, Noah called out, "Liam, you playing or what?" Liam hesitated, then gave Ethan a long, searching look. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" Ethan nodded. "Of course. Now go play." As Liam ran off to join his brothers, Ethan's mind raced. Michael was escalating, and it was only a matter of time before he followed through on his threats. Ethan knew he couldn't afford to wait any longer. He needed to take action. The confrontation. That evening, Ethan sat down with Emily to discuss their next steps. They had spent weeks gathering evidence against Michael, but now it was time to make their move. Emily had used her connections to track down some of Michael's recent associates, uncovering a trail of debts, failed schemes, and even a few minor criminal charges. "He's desperate," Emily said, laying out the information on Ethan's kitchen table. "But he's also reckless. That's his weakness." Ethan nodded, his jaw set. "It's time to involve the police." Emily placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You've done everything right, Ethan. With the evidence we've gathered, they'll have no choice but to take this seriously." The next morning, Ethan met with Detective Carla Monroe, a no-nonsense officer with a reputation for handling cases involving harassment and extortion. He handed over the recordings, transcripts of Michael's messages, and Emily's detailed report on his activities. "This is a solid case," Detective Monroe said after reviewing the materials. "We can issue a restraining order immediately and launch an investigation. But you need to be prepared. Men like Michael don't always back down quietly." Ethan nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my boys." The fallout. The restraining order was served the following day, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt a sense of relief. But it didn't last long. That evening, as the family sat down to dinner, there was a loud knock at the door. Ethan's heart sank as he exchanged a glance with Liam, who had already started to rise from his chair. "Stay here," Ethan said, his voice firm. He walked to the door, his pulse racing, and opened it to find Michael standing on the porch, his face twisted in anger. "You think a piece of paper can stop me?" Michael sneered, holding up the restraining order. Ethan stepped outside, closing the door behind him to keep the boys from hearing. "You're violating it right now," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "The police are already on their way." Michael's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You're going to regret this, Ethan." "No," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. "You're the one who's going to regret it." The sound of sirens filled the air, and Michael's expression shifted from anger to panic. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and Detective Monroe stepped out, her presence commanding. Within minutes, Michael was handcuffed and placed in the back of a squad car, his protests drowned out by the officer's firm instructions. As the cars pulled away, Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest. He turned to find Emily standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her face. "It's over," she said. Ethan nodded, the realization sinking in. It's over. A new chapter. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Michael's arrest led to an investigation that uncovered enough evidence to charge him with multiple counts of harassment and extortion. Ethan worked closely with Detective Monroe to ensure a strong case, but his focus remained on the boys. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace for a game of charades, Liam pulled Ethan aside. Is it really over? Liam asked, his voice low. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. It is. He's not coming back. Liam nodded, his expression a mix of relief and gratitude. Thanks, Dad, for keeping us safe. Ethan's chest swelled with pride. That's my job, Liam, and I'll always be here for you. As they rejoined the others, Ethan looked around the room at his boys. Noah laughing as Jake tried to mimic Caleb's exaggerated charades gestures, Liam smiling despite himself, and Caleb quietly enjoying the warmth of the moment. They had been through so much, but their bond had only grown stronger. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had passed, and his family was safe. Together, they would face whatever came next, stronger and more united than ever. Strength in unity. The weeks after Michael's arrest brought a profound sense of relief to Ethan and the boys. The tension that had shadowed their home for months began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of stability and peace. Yet, while the external threat had been removed, the lingering effects of the ordeal left their mark on everyone. Ethan understood that healing wasn't instant. His focus shifted to rebuilding the sense of normalcy and security that Michael's presence had threatened. What Ethan didn't expect was how much the experience would ultimately strengthen their bond as a family. The scars beneath the surface. Despite the newfound calm, the boys each processed the events differently. Liam, as the eldest, struggled with guilt. He had always seen himself as the protector of his younger brothers, and Michael's threats had made him feel powerless. One evening, after the younger boys had gone to bed, Ethan found Liam sitting on the porch, staring out into the dark. The cool night air carried the faint scent of pine, and the distant hum of crickets filled the silence. Can't sleep? Ethan asked, sitting down beside him. Liam shrugged, his shoulders tense. I keep thinking about what could have happened if you hadn't stopped him. If he'd hurt us. Ethan placed a comforting hand on Liam's shoulder. Liam, what happened wasn't your fault. Michael was a dangerous man, and it was my job to handle him. But I'm supposed to look out for them, Liam said, his voice cracking. I promised Mom and Dad. Ethan's chest tightened. Liam, he said gently, you've done more for your brothers than anyone could ever ask. You're an incredible big brother, and they look up to you because they trust you. But you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this by yourself. Liam looked at Ethan, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I just don't want anything bad to happen to them. And it won't, Ethan promised. We're a team now. You, me, and your brothers. We'll face everything together. Liam nodded, his expression softening. Thanks, Dad. It was the first time Liam had called him that without hesitation, and the word filled Ethan with a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew then that Liam was beginning to trust him fully, not just as a caregiver, but as a father. A newfound confidence. Noah, on the other hand, channeled his energy into soccer. He had always been competitive, but now his drive became almost relentless. Ethan attended every practice and game, cheering loudly from the sidelines, even on the coldest afternoons. After one particularly intense game, where Noah's team narrowly lost, Ethan found him sitting on the bleachers, his jaw tight with frustration. Hey, Ethan said, sitting beside him. Tough game, huh? Noah nodded, his fists clenched. I should have played better. If I'd scored that last goal, we could have won. Ethan smiled, his voice calm and encouraging. You played your heart out, Noah. That's what matters. Winning isn't everything. Noah looked at him, his expression conflicted. I don't want to let anyone down. Ethan placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. You could never let us down, Noah. You're an amazing kid, and we're proud of you no matter what. For the first time in weeks, Noah's tense posture relaxed. Thanks, Dad, he said quietly. I'll do better next time. You already did great, Ethan said with a grin. But I'll be here to cheer you on no matter what. Caleb's quiet resolve. Caleb's response to the turmoil was quieter, but no less significant. He withdrew into his books, spending hours reading in the library or sketching intricate designs in his notebooks. Ethan recognized the signs of Caleb retreating into himself and made a point to engage him in activities that drew him out of his shell. One Saturday morning, Ethan surprised Caleb with a trip to the Science Museum. The younger boys were excited about the hands-on exhibits, but Caleb's eyes lit up when they reached the planetarium. As they sat beneath the dome, watching the stars come to life on the ceiling, Caleb leaned toward Ethan. "This is amazing," Caleb whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "Do you think I could work at a place like this someday?" Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Absolutely. You can do anything you set your mind to." Caleb hesitated, then said, "Thanks for taking us here, Dad." Ethan placed an arm around Caleb's shoulders. "You're welcome, buddy. I love seeing you excited about something. It's one of my favorite things about you." Caleb beamed, and Ethan knew he was starting to rebuild the boy's confidence in his place in their family. Jake's pure joy. Jake, the youngest, seemed to recover the quickest. His innocence shielded him from fully understanding the gravity of what had happened, and he continued to bring laughter and light into their home. One evening, as Ethan prepared dinner, Jake tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can we bake cookies?" Ethan chuckled. "Cookies before dinner? Isn't that against the rules?" Jake grinned mischievously. "Not if we eat them after dinner." Ethan couldn't resist Jake's enthusiasm, and soon the kitchen was a flurry of flour, chocolate chips, and laughter. The older boys joined in, each taking turns stirring the batter or sneaking a spoonful of dough. By the time the cookies were ready, the house smelled of warmth and happiness. As they sat around the table, enjoying the freshly baked treats, Jake climbed into Ethan's lap and wrapped his small arms around him. "I love you, Daddy," he said, his voice muffled against Ethan's shirt. Ethan hugged him tightly, his heart full. "I love you too, buddy." Looking forward, the turning point for the family came on a crisp winter evening when Ethan gathered the boys for a special announcement. They sat together in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. "I wanted to talk to you all about something important," Ethan began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We've been through a lot together, and I couldn't be prouder of each of you. You've shown me what it means to be a family." The boys exchanged curious glances, sensing the gravity of his words. "I've been thinking," Ethan continued, "that it's time to make things official. I want to adopt you. All of you. If that's something you want to." For a moment, there was silence as the boys processed his words. Then Liam spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You mean, we be your sons? For real?" Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "For real, if that's what you want." Tears filled Liam's eyes as he reached out to hug Ethan. "I'd like that," he said quietly. The other boys quickly joined in, their voices overlapping with cries of "yes," and "we want that too," as they piled onto Ethan in a group hug. Jake, perched on Ethan's lap, clapped his hands excitedly. "Yay, we're a real family." Ethan held them close, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt complete. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but together, they were stronger than ever. As the snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in quiet beauty, Ethan looked around at his boys, his family, and knew that they had truly found their way home.